Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's time for the daily edition and the catch-up. I hope you've had a nice Saturday, you know, not being able to get out and about, got your jobs done, and we can listen to another article in the series. Just before we do, of course, as always, all the pictures that get sent in, I've got some beautiful ones today. Here's Neil. Oh, I don't know Neil's age, but I suppose if we had to guess, must be late 80s, something like that. But lovely picture of Neil there. Beautiful picture, Neil. Thanks for sending that one in. And then we've got this guy here. Looks like somebody I know, but he hasn't put a name on there. But anyway, great looking guy, whoever that is. Thanks for sending your picture in as well. That's lovely. I'm going to pick up on this month, and we've got September 2008. Now, September 2008 is quite interesting. So obviously would have been about 6 weeks before, like I said. So it's all about the Winter League final. You can see here we're obviously a bit short of a picture. Got my drill out in the garden. Obviously a bit desperate for a photo of that that month, weren't we? And then obviously a nice little team talk being given by Tommy here. This is when the Barnsley Blacks were sponsored by Maver. I absolutely loved the Winter League final when I used to go and fish it on the Neen. To be honest, it was like really enjoyable, but actually going back and reading this, I realised how absolutely naff it was, and the fishing was really poor. I think it was more the style of the fishing that I really enjoyed, which was a lot of it was bloodworm and joker based stuff, you know. But obviously you can tell by what I'm about to read, the fishing wasn't great, but it's very interesting to get an insight into how we sort of dealt with it. I had some amazing results on the Neen. But this one covers some ups and certainly some downs, so very interesting piece. Hope you enjoy it. Why is it that as anglers we are so desperate to learn new tricks and tips, yet we don't seem as capable of stepping back and looking at how we approach our matches and how we make the most of our pegs during our time on the bank? I spent most of the past month practicing for the Winter League final on the River Neen, a match that involves my favourite type of fishing, and that's bloodworm and joker in deep water. Still a method I particularly enjoy. I wouldn't say it's my favourite anymore, but I particularly enjoy it. The venue was situated in Peterborough town centre, with the match length covering 3 different areas: Rail World, which is a narrow stretch of more natural river; the town centre, a wide concrete banked area; and the North Bank, which is a straight deep stretch with grassy banks either side. Each area offered a different challenge, meaning teams constantly had to put their heads together in order to get the best results. It started for me on permanent peg 3 on the North Bank. Having fished this river for years, I like to think that I've developed a bit of an understanding for the different conditions, yet still try to keep an open mind. I sort of fished there quite a lot with hot rods in the past, and we'd been all over the river, and it was such a moody river. You knew when you got there you were either going to be looking at bream, later in the season roach, depending on the colour, all those sorts of things. The first match greeted competitors with strong winds and a river that looked like tap water, although looking at some of the locals it's probably best left for fishing rather than drinking. With the wind being so strong, it was obvious the favoured approach was likely to be feeder for bream. They're usually the first fish to show early season, so this was to be the primary approach. The backup method was pole, but with 15 feet of water at 13 metres, it was going to be impossible to fish at that distance properly in a gale. So I plumbed up just over the weed at 9 metres, where I found 10 feet, but with a very weedy bottom. I felt tiny roach and perch would be my quarry here, as the bait would be presented just off bottom. Rigs were simple: 1, 1.5 and 2 gram Magic 6, Preston Magic 6 floats, amazing float still, shotted with an Olivet around 12 inches from the hook, and 5 number 8 droppers, all spread at 1 inch intervals, which is quite an intense shotting pattern. You can imagine that, very, very tight shotting pattern. I think that was because there was so many tiny fish. Unless you had your shot tighter, you tended to miss bites. Lines were Reflow Power and 011 main line and 07 hook lengths, with a size 20 PR25 to finish them off. I'd definitely be looking at like an N40 these days, something like that. The next decision to make was the ground baits to use. Now, the team was sponsored by Van den Eyck at the time, so it was Super Match, Super Lake and Secret, and Brown Crumb in equal quantities, with over 4 kilo mixed up. I was certainly ready to cover both lines. Just before the start, I heard some loud and interesting words coming from the next peg down. I hadn't been able to see who it was until then, and then I instantly recognised the voice of teammate Andy Oldham. Unbelievably, we draw next to each other for the third match in a row. And I will say, I bet I haven't drawn next to Andy since that day, which is incredible. He, like me, was getting incredibly frustrated with difficult conditions, but he opted to wrestle a manly 11 metres instead of my boys 9 metres. I really felt sorry for his pole. At the all-in, I threw 6 balls containing 150ml of Joker onto my pole line, then a further 15 with 500ml of Joker and casters onto the feeder line for bream at 20 metres. Have it. I'd be ready for them. These 2 lines were a simple approach for the conditions and would allow me to concentrate on a method in order to get it right. I started on the pole and was very pleased to be straight into tiny roach, and they were tiny, in the region of 40 to the pound. But as the first hour went by, I steadily put some fish in the net. Early reports had suggested that no bream had shown yet, so I decided to leave the feeder line a little bit longer and keep working hard on the pole. Into the second hour, I was still steadily plodding along when I was about to swing in a tiny roach and the rig jagged and the hook length snapped. Then the same thing happened again. I was starting to think it was bad luck when the next thing I knew, a 5-pound pike leapt out of the water and took my fish mid-air. After recovering from the shock of a short tussle, which I duly lost, you can imagine that I had some choice words. The pike action certainly hadn't helped the peg and the bites were beginning to fade. The situation wasn't helped at all by the fact that bloodworm had been delivered in peat. Sam was unavailable for this match, I believe, and the bloodworm was came from down south somewhere, and it was in this peat, and I didn't know what to do, and it just dried out. I should have kept it in water. It was terrible. But it dried out in the rim, and it became difficult to find anything to put on the hook. Finally, I snared a roach, only to have it instantly taken by a pike again. This was frustrating as the fishing seemed to be incredibly hard, but as the battle began, I thought I might have a chance as it was hooked in the scissors. It took 6 sections of pole, all my strength to battle it in the gale, but I duly netted the 5-pound fish from earlier on 0.7 reflow power, which is obviously the line for piking. By this point, my peg had completely died, so with about 1 pound in the net, because the pike don't count, I decided to re-feed the line with 4 balls of double Lehman Joker and then take a walk. A few pegs along, I found Preston Innovations' Ricky Teal. He too was battling the conditions with around the same as me in the net. He was sticking it out because he'd heard the river was fishing rock hard. On his side tray, he had some excellent bloodworm hook bait. And I was then thinking about pinching a swiping a pinch even, when he kindly offered me some to take back from my peg. Thanks, mate. It was like switching a light on. As soon as I got some quality bait, I managed a few bites again in the last hour. When the scales arrived, my fish went a hard-fought 1 pound 14.5 ounces, which was enough to pinch the section from Ricky. I was even more amazed when I got back to the pub and I had come second in the 86 peg match. Jimmy Hines had won with 3 bream for just under £8, but a healthy wad found its way to my wallet and I started thinking about how my focus on the short pole line had rewarded me, apart from the fact I went for a walk. The next practice match, a week later, saw me heading to a totally different area of the river, Rail Whirl, peg 574. This peg is right in the middle of the section, and with the narrower river profile, it creates some extra pace, and I felt some bites were on the cards. Based on the previous match, I opted for another single-minded approach to the day, this time at 13 metres. I'd found a clear run in about 11 feet of water and set up the same rigs from the week before. The only addition saw me set up a 1 gram pencil style float, a Magic 5. That was probably one of the first times I set a Magic 5 pencil up, and I caught some unbelievable fish on that over the next few years. In my opinion, pencil floats act in 3 different ways. Firstly, they give little resistance to fish on the bite and come cleanly out of the water on the strike, which I'm convinced results in hitting more bites. Secondly, you can lower them into the water smoothly to aid your presentation. And finally, and most importantly in my opinion, they cannot be held back against the flow, thereby encourages anglers to run the float through at the pace of the river, which is crucial for roach. Very interesting. Ground bait was also the same as the week before. 12 balls with 250ml of Joker in were balled in, and bites came instantly from little perch. As the match progressed, my small roach also found their way into the peg. Topping up with Joker-rich balls of double Lee meant the peg was getting stronger all the time, and as the guys either side of me were struggling, I decided to keep plugging away. By sticking with the same line, I was able to work out how the fish were reacting to my feed and the best way to top up in order to maximise bites. It was important to top up regularly to maintain bites, but towards the last hour I started to get overexcited and topped up too regularly. This made bites difficult to hit and meant I missed out on some vital fish in the last 45 minutes. This was an important lesson for bloodworm and joker fishing, and I'm constantly experimenting with feeding patterns to keep bites coming. That was a time when I was doing a lot of bloodworm and joker fishing nearly everywhere I went, and my understanding of the feeding increased rapidly over that time. It was a really enjoyable time. I really did love my fishing back then. It was great. The scales arrived and gave me £5 11 ounces, which was unfortunately beaten by a couple of big perch and gave me a frustrating section second. I believe another £1 was on the cards had I not have overcooked the feed, which would have been more than enough to win. I still felt I had a chance of framing over them all, but my partner, Brett Clark, had pipped me by 1 ounce with a bream caught on the maggots I'd given to him. The moral of both matches so far? Don't lend your bait to your rivals. I was further frustrated when £6.10 was second in the match. I'd had 5.11, which I definitely should have caught. Again, I felt focusing on one line throughout the match had kept me in touch with the peg enough to beat all the anglers around me. The final open match produced a similar performance, again from Rail World, with 2 big bream beating my £4.10 of roach for the section. Again, I was second. I mean, you know, these are low weights, aren't they? 5.11. These are loads of anglers on these matches, 100 anglers on these matches. I was beginning to feel really comfortable with the fishing and the style required for good points, so I therefore felt it was important to spend the remaining practice days, because we practiced like not in a match, in the week leading up to the match, on backup methods such as bleak fishing and chop worms and things like that, and the team all did the same. Come the big day, and Peg 71 found me on the North Bank. Boo. In an area where we'd practiced earlier in the week. We were greeted by some extra flow on the river, so I was confident my section would produce some roach and an odd bream to the long pole. Rigs were as on the previous practice match, along with backup rigs for bleaking, chop worm and over the weed next to my keep net for a few tinies. On the all-in, my ground bait went in really nicely, and a hopeful rig found its way down the peg. A bite first put in resulted in a small 1 ounce perch finding the net, and that was just the beginning, I thought. And it was the beginning of a biteless 2 hours. Onto the backup line, and for the next 2.5 hours I tried everything to get a bite, but to no avail. I finally settled on chop worm for the last 30 minutes to try and get a big fish, and I only managed a couple of small perch. This gave me 7 ounces. An 11th in my 14 peg section. To say I was gutted was an understatement. I was absolutely devastated at the end of that match. I really, really was. In terms of the rest of the section, the anglers either side of me weighed 2 ounce and 7 ounces as well, with Tony Martin from Image winning the section and the match with £24 a bream for the infamous cables, which was an excellent performance in rock hard conditions. Back at the results, it became apparent that the team had had one other blowout, but the remaining 8 lads had all caught on the long pole and managed an incredible 18 points between them. Even with our 2 bad results, it was looking promising until the news filtered through that Steve Gardner had caught an eel with 10 minutes remaining to take the title for Dorking. It was an incredibly tense final for all the teams, but I was left feeling crushed by my own result and have constantly been searching for answers since. This, in fact, has made me look full circle to my original statement about analysing how I approach big matches and, more importantly, the decisions I make during a match. In the Winter League final, I was desperately searching for a solution to catch me a fish, yet looking back it was staring me in the face. I should have had the confidence in my ability and worked hard on one particular method to figure it out and catch some fish. Instead, I ended up trying to cover everything for 3 hours, and it was a big mistake. I don't personally think, I think looking back on that, that's probably not worded correctly in my opinion. I remember Callum Dix was just down from me this day, and he caught probably 2.5 pound on a long pole, fished a really, really nice match. And I felt I didn't catch early, and I started doing too many things to try to find fish. And maybe if I'd have persevered with the long pole a little bit nicer than I did, I would have done a bit better. I do remember really for that match almost being a little bit too hyped up. I'd won a lot of things in the practice, or I'd done really well in the practice, and I was a little bit too hyped up. I think you change as time goes on. Your mentality changes as time goes on. You know, we are talking about being 25 years old at the time, you know, and your attitude changes with time. So it was very, very, very interesting time in my fishing. It's really nice to look back at, actually. I always think about the success we've had in the last 7-8 years of Barnsley has been absolutely unbelievable. But before that happened, we had 5 or 6, or probably 3 or 4 years when I first joined, maybe 5 years, when we would do well, but Dorking were by far and away, in my opinion, the best team in the country at the time, and it was hard to get near them. So really, really interesting looking back at this and looking how it's all developed. Dorking won the final by having confidence in their methods and caught late fish. Brilliant. I remember brilliant bank running from Steve Saunders as well. He helped them so much catch those bonus fish in so many finals. Brilliant, brilliant manager. Combined with some amazing performances to score an incredible 30 points on the day. Driving home, I reviewed what I feel for me has been a poor run of form in big matches over the past month. I think that's probably been a little bit harsh on myself, because I'd actually done really well in the other matches, just poor in the match that mattered, and that was the key. And that is the key. Don't peak too soon. Is it to do with poor peg, perhaps? Maybe. More likely it's because the poorer pegs, more likely it's because on the poorer pegs, I'm not carrying the belief long enough to get my chosen methods to work. My better results have come in other matches because I've focused and kept the faith with methods that I believe are right, and have built pegs throughout the day to finish up with some great results. This month certainly has been a big learning curve in my match fishing, and has not only taught me to make positive decisions in my matches, but also that although it is important to learn from other people, you must learn from yourself. That is the most important lesson. Next time you have a poor result, don't just blame the draw. Think carefully about your match and what you could have done in order to turn a potential disaster into a potential good return. I find that quite an interesting piece. I hope you have too. We'll be back tomorrow because, hey, we're in lockdown. Not a lot else to do. I hope you're enjoying this little series, and I'll catch you tomorrow.